Hey, an important podcast today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on Distributed with TED Magazine, the official podcast for TED Magazine. We're talking about some big stuff today, and we're fortunate that the folks from Eaton are joining us because they're going to talk to us about the 2020 NEC code when it comes to reconditioned circuit breakers. This is important, and I've said it 3 times already because it's important. And I'm glad that you guys are listening in because there's some new regulations that you guys definitely need to know about. And joining us today is Tom Dimitrovich. Tom is a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering degree focused on power engineering. He's a licensed professional engineer with a lead associate professional. Thomas sits on the NEC's CMP 2 and 10, the NFPA 70B, the NFPA 73, the NFPA 78 and 1078, and other product standards focusing on electrical safety and proper application of electrical solutions. Tom's been with Eaton for 23 years. He's held various positions in marketing, sales, and application engineering, and he currently supports multiple product lines impacted by changes in these codes and standards. Also joining me is Marilee Williams. Marilee holds a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Business Administration from the University of Notre Dame. She's worked in the electrical sector at Eaton Corporation for 25 years. She's held various positions in customer service, supply chain, demand planning, accounting management, and most recently, product management for molded case circuit breakers, supporting aftermarket. I appreciate both of them taking time out of their day today to discuss this with us. Marilee and Tom, thanks so much for joining us. We really got to kind of get into this. And the essential part of this is the rules are changing in 2020. And Tom, I'm going to start with you because you created a blog, a white paper, a statement piece for the Eaton website titled "For Safety's Sake, Defining Reconditioned Equipment." And one of the things that you really pointed out about this new National Electrical Code was what you called the one critical rule, which is the rewrite of it, which was Section 110.21A2. And we probably got to dive right into that. So Tom, tell us what that is, why it's so essential, and that's really going to set up our entire conversation today. So explain what that is for me.
Sure thing. So first, it's great to be here. So I'm going to enjoy this discussion. So 110.21 is a marking requirement in the National Electrical Code, and because it's in Chapter 1, if you understand the NEC, Chapters 1 through 4 apply generally. So anything that you find in Chapters 1 through 4 apply to all electrical installations. So 110.21 is a marking requirement. And in that specific, in the specific area that talks to reconditioned equipment, there was a change that was made it started last cycle in the 2017 code, where we created this reconditioned equipment section. And in there, we have language that says you have to mark the product that you recondition with who it was that did the reconditioning. And I look at it as transparency. And that went in the last cycle. So you basically, if you recondition a piece of equipment, whether it be switchboards or motors or whatever it is that you're working on, you're going to have to put your name on it that you did the work and whatever that organization's name is. And then you're maintaining also that the original manufacturers, there's no requirements that you have to remove the original manufacturer's labels or anything like that. Now, this cycle in the 2020 code, when we sat down at the table, they just started discussing, what about the listing mark? What about the fact that the original listing? So when I talk about a listing mark, I'm talking about the test that UL or some nationally recognized testing laboratory, we call those NRTLs for short, NRTLs. What they'll put that product through its paces. So, for example, I say a circuit breaker can interrupt 22,000 amps or 65,000 amps. They're going to make sure that breaker can interrupt 65,000 amps. They're going to make sure that the product can do that under various types of conditions. So that all of those tests that we put those products through, when we pass the UL when we pass the test by whichever NRTL's putting us through that, which happens to be for our breakers with UL, we can put a label, a sticker on there that says, from that third party organization, that says this is going to meet the requirements of the standards that we associated with that product. Now, what they did in the 2020 code was they had a revelation that, Once you take this, whatever it is that you're refurbishing, reconditioning, once you take it apart and you start to put it back together again, you are in a situation where you're now no longer under the guide of that UL standard. It really doesn't apply anymore because that UL sticker applied to the product when it shipped from the manufacturer. Once you've modified it in the field and you've done reconditioning, refurbishing, and you've replaced components to get it back to a working condition, you've basically, you need to remove that UL, that sticker that gives that certification. And in my opinion, it's all about transparency.
Right, right. And so what happens is, just for, again, for clarity's sake, so if for whatever reason, it ends up back in the hands of a distributor, it ends up in the hands of a contractor,
Mhm.
simply put, if it doesn't have a UL sticker on it, it hasn't been approved for use. Is that basically, or it hasn't been tested for use? Is that the basic way of putting it, I suppose?
Or
Is it
from a manufacturer, we put it through certain tests, and we'll list the product to a standard, and that standard has a set of testing that we will do on our products, and then once we pass all those tests, which basically says it'll do what it's designed to do. It'll interrupt the fault currents it's designed to interrupt, and it'll be able to operate in the environment that it's listed for, and from a testing perspective, we put a label on that equipment that says it's listed for that application, and it's gone through certifications and review and all this other good stuff. Well, once you make that modification, the code requirement says that the reconditioned equipment shall be identified as reconditioned and the original listing mark removed. So now I have to remove that listing mark, and uh, that doesn't mean that it can't have another sticker or another label applied to it from a nerdle. It just means that the original one has to be taken off. Now, the second sentence in that 110.21 paragraph that talks about this removal, it says approval of the reconditioned equipment shall not be based solely on the equipment's original listing. And so from a, like you said, your question was around, from a distributor perspective, if I receive this product, I received a reconditioned product in my facility, I'm going to have a label on it that tells me what company reconditioned it, right? So that's, and again,
right, right?
that's transparency. So if I always use Joe Schmuckatelli's house down the street, his garage, he's reconditioning whatever it is that I'm selling. When I get it, I'm going to see his label on there as he did the work, and then the original listing mark has to be removed, which means that original listing doesn't apply anymore. And maybe Joe in his company, when he did the reconditioning, maybe he applied another label that says this is a reconditioned piece of equipment and it's been evaluated against UL whatever standard that applies to that product. And then he also may be under the envelope of a nationally recognized testing laboratory who comes to his facility, reviews the work that he's doing, and permits him to put these labels on it based upon their review of the products that he's remanufacturing or reconditioning.
Mhm. And I'm not cutting any new edges here by saying this, but one, if you're a distributor and you're buying product from Joe Schmuckatelli, you probably need to redo your business model. But secondly, is we've been talking about this for a long time. I mean, it's circuit breakers that have gone through floods and hurricanes and what happened in Houston or Florida. I mean, we're not cutting any new edges here by saying that there's breakers out there that have been reconditioned based on they've been underwater, for lack of a
Wow.
better term. So merrily, all of a sudden now it becomes, what, this is suddenly going to matter more. Why is that? Why is it all of a sudden? Why is the change in the code coming? Why does it matter more now than in the past?
The NEC has for a long time not deemed molded case as suitable for rework or reconditioning. But because some of that transparency that Tom talked about was not available in the code, you couldn't tell whether or not a breaker had potentially been refurbished or not. So a lot of times folks will sell refurbished product misrepresented as new. So for my product line, what's most exciting is that because of the transparency, we're able to better identify the potential for products to be refurbished and have stronger teeth in our messaging out to our distributors as to why they don't want to buy product that's been refurbished. So it's just given us a little bit more of an edge on education and awareness, and brought to light a little bit more of what the dangers are of folks that may not be suitable to refurbish product, or product that's not suitable for refurbishment, and make sure that those buyers have a little bit more confidence in what they're trying to demand from their suppliers, and what they're trying to demand from their product.
Right, and I think from our listeners, you bring up a great point. From our listeners' standpoint, not cutting any new edges, but just reminding folks that there's sort of a juvenileness to what the law says, which is basically you touched it last. So as a result, you're also responsible. Whether or not you did anything to it or not isn't the point. If it passed through a distributorship, and then it created a fire, there's still a liability for that distributorship. Even if all you did was looked at it in the box and didn't actually put your fingers on it, you're still responsible. And I think that that's a big part of this. And Tom, I know Eaton has worked extremely hard on making sure that obviously its breakers are properly labeled and sold through the proper channels. Are the changes from this new NEC regulation? Is that going to stop the practice of taking, say, example, molded case circuit breakers out of the panel boards in the facility, placing them in storage, and then using them again on other projects?
I don't think that activity is just going to stop on the dime just because of the changes that we've had in the NEC. Unfortunately, when you have product that is, say, in one part of the country, to your point earlier, that's maybe been underwater, and now it's been cleaned up and it's put back on a shelf somewhere else or being sold to someone else. In many cases, I mean, I could clean up the outside of especially a molded case circuit breaker. I can clean the outside up and make it look like it's pristine, and you don't know what's going on the inside. And if I take it apart, then I violate the code because I'm not permitted to do that, because there's all these other reasons when you start popping rivets or you take screws out that are self-tapping, and it just doesn't, the product doesn't lend itself to being worked on in that manner. Then I have other issues as well. So when I talk to individuals, I talk to end users, contractors, design engineers, and owners. Knowing the history of that product is really critical, right? If you're in your facility and you bought a brand new product in 5 or 6 years ago or whenever, and it's been working in place and it's working fine, and you know the environment that it's in, and you take it out of that panel and you put it on the shelf and then you reuse it in another area of your plant, that type of activity is not that big of an issue, is because you know the history of that product. Right. But when you are sourcing your solution from somebody who's not a distributor of the manufacturer of that product, and it's outside of the normal channels, you really don't know the history of the product that you're buying. Was it taken apart? Was it in a flood? What did it see over its life? Whether it's a circuit breaker or any other piece of equipment, right? In reality, it's like a buyer beware type of deal. And when we rely on these overcurrent devices to reduce incident energy for electrical workers who put their lives at risk when they're doing justified energized work, or relying on these devices to establish an electrically safe working condition per the requirements of an NFPA 70E for electrical safe work practices, they demand the performance of that product to be where it needs to be because their lives depend on it. And if you're sourcing a solution that you don't know anything about, you don't know the history of, that's a concern. That's a concern.
And that, I think, is a good point. And merely, as Tom just said, you don't know the history of the product. Just so we're clear on Eaton's stance on this, if you're not getting it from Eaton, then you shouldn't be buying it from that particular broker of that breaker. Eaton's done a great job. They have a page on their website that I've seen. It has 180 something different companies that say these people are not authorized brokers of our products. So how can I be sure that what I'm getting is Eaton made, and what should our distributors be doing now to make sure that they're not selling, reconditioned products, or that they're going to be following what this new NEC code is?
I think that's a great question. And I call it chain of custody, is what Tom talked about, right? Just making sure that if you don't know the chain of custody, or if you don't see a connection between your supplier and the manufacturer, that's a red flag right away. If they're not an authorized supplier, then it's hard to tell where they got it from. And what we find is when you ask a lot of questions of our customers or end users, and they say, well, I got it from a guy. Okay, well, and he got it from a guy, and he got it from a guy, and he got it from a guy. So now you have this connectivity between some broker who knows where, and five connections later, you've got a breaker, and that guy that sold it to you may never have even touched the breaker himself or had it in his possession. So if he doesn't know the history of the breaker, how can you possibly be sure of it? And so that's the message that we tend to go out with folks when they talk about, no, I've got someone that I need. So what we've done with our programs is make sure that that our distributors don't need to go to other brokers. But lots of programs and pricing programs and education programs and promotional programs together to be able to make it competitively priced product available to them. So making sure that there's not a gap between what we really perceive as the market level pricing and what we might be working with our distributors to make sure they have available to them. And so I think it's incumbent upon end users, buyers, anybody who's making these purchasing decisions to ask questions. If for some reason they're not buying it directly from Eaton, which our distributors, we have policies in place that our distributors are to be buying breakers from Eaton directly, ask the question. It's okay to say, where did this breaker come from? Is there a chance it's refurbished? And because some people don't even realize that might be an issue, they wouldn't even know to ask. So we want to be sure that if you're speccing a project, that you make sure you put in there something about ensuring that breakers come from new authorized sources.
Go ahead, Tom. You're gonna add on to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head. Yeah, because that's a really important part of all of this. And if you think about a molded case circuit breaker, we know we can't recondition a molded case circuit breaker. But when you get into the power circuit breakers and other equipment that can be reconditioned and refurbished, distributors can still sell those types of solutions. And I know we do reconditioning, refurbishing, and there are other very qualified individuals out there who will actively do that type of work when it's permitted and on equipment that's permitted. And again, you're looking at, in those areas, you're looking at making sure that whoever you're sourcing from there as well has got third-party review of their solutions, as from a certification perspective, or from you take an organization like Eaton, we're like so ingrained with our nationally recognized tested laboratories. They're always in our facilities, watching over our shoulders and things of that nature, and surprise checks and whatnot. Other organizations might not be doing that type of deal, but there are others there that maybe have that level of quality in their reconditioned equipment as well.
And I think that there's a logic to it, and I understand it. In terms of, hey, you know what, buy brand name stuff. Don't buy, if you buy a pair of knockoff Nike shoes, guess what? They're probably not going to last as well as the real thing. And
Right.
I think our distributors have some kind of idea about that. But Tom, the fact of the matter is, you guys have had some real life situations where it said Eaton on the box, but they were reconditioned breakers and they were installed in projects and they were caught on it. I mean, regardless of the logic to it, the fact of the matter is, this is still happening today.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? What kind of real life cases are you seeing out there? I mean, I get, distributors like, I just want to get this job done, and I'm not, it's the spec says it needs an Eaton breaker. I'm not an Eaton distributor, so I'm just going to go to a broker and I'm going to buy whatever's out there because I want to get this job done and put money in my pocket.
Yeah.
As much as I'd like to say that never happens, the fact of the matter is that happens. So what are you seeing out there, and what can you do about it to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, so I have a really good relationship with a lot of electrical inspectors across the country, and usually they're going to come across a lot of this because a lot of times, owners and even contractors, when they source the product, they'll get it installed, and it takes an inspector who's very well aware of, say, the UL listing requirements and modifications. There's code requirements where he's looking for or she's looking for when something's been modified in the field, and a lot of times you can spot these. But there are there are those out there. For example, I had one instance where an inspector sent me pictures of the labels on a molded case circuit breaker, and the you could see that they were our labels. I mean, they had our logo on it. They had all of our information, but they were printed off of a printer, probably from Avery Label, right, and cut off and put on the face of the breaker. And I was just amazed that somebody would go to that extent to label that breaker, and then they sold it to a facility that was doing an add-on, and they were installed. So I take stuff like that, I get that over to the individuals and organizations that dog those applications and go and ask the hard questions to all the right people, and we ferret those out. But the inspector organizations and communities have been educated to spot those things, which I think is really important. So education, I mean, we do presentations and seminars where we talk about authenticity, and we talk about how to recognize when something has been modified, and then the code requirements around that. And this is one of those. So across the country, at all of the International Association of Electrical Inspectors, IAEI is their acronym, they're going to be talking about 2020 code changes, and I've done a few already, and they'll be going on all next year in training sessions. And this topic of recondition will come up, and the topic of counterfeit product, and the topic of authenticity and chain, that value chain that Mary talked about. That's all going to be discussed, and education, I think, will help solve some of these problems. We can put things in specifications, but to your point, hey, I need a product. And what usually happens, here's how it plays out. We fell short of these breakers. I called the manufacturer. They tell me I got a lead time. I can't live with the lead time. So where else do I get this? And then they grab anybody they can get that can get them a something that looks like what they need. And because time is money, and I need to get it on hand. Yeah, so it's important. It's important that our accuracy at bid time, our accuracy as vision into as the projects change. If you didn't need a 600 amp breaker and you ended up needing an 800 amp breaker, to get those products on order so that the lead times don't hurt you as much. And making sure that, hey, if I'm going to go and source it to a different distributor because I can't get what I need right away, find another authorized distributor. There's other channels that you can go to that are still within the right channels, right? It may not be the distributor down the street, maybe up the street that you need to get the solution and get an authentic solution, not something that's off of eBay and other locations.
Yeah.
You know how that goes.
I do. So,
Right.
Scott, I think it's interesting. I found several times that when customers ask me about hard to get product, things that we only sell a couple a year of, I'll just go get it somewhere else. And I remind them and I say, but if I haven't sold many in the last 2 years, how does this distributor or this non-authorized reseller that's down the street from you in Minnesota happen to have one?
That's right.
You're right.
Unusual.
Yeah.
So
Where did it come from?
We had an instance where an OEM came to me and asked me just that. Well, if you can't get this for me, I'll get it from somebody else. And I said, well, we have a tool that we use to authenticate molded case product and make sure we know what they purchased is actually what they wanted. And when I went to do that with the help of Tom Grace, who's our brand protection manager, I've been chasing this for a lot of years. When I went to do that with him, what we found was that this reseller had relabeled a 65 KA product and said it could handle 100 KA. For those in the industry, they know that that's not something that the breaker is designed to do. And if pushed to try and handle that kind of fault, would fail. So it was really scary for that particular customer when he realized that, he went outside the bounds, and that very first time he did, he got burned immediately. I mean, it's far too prevalent than people really realize.
Yeah, and really, if you think about it, I've talked to some of our customers they'll say, "Well, I have a system that was made in the 50s or 60s, and I can't get that breaker anymore." And I was not too long ago up at our Beaver, Pennsylvania plant where we make these circuit breakers, and there's a line where they can make vintage product, so they still make older product. And what I try to tell customers is if you have some of that vintage product or installed and you don't have spares that you can rely on, then you could order them now and you can get something still from the manufacturer and put it on the shelf where we still make that stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's amazing that, sometimes you just have to ask the right questions to say, hey, can I still get this catalog number to a sales engineer or back to which will funnel back to the plant, and they'll say, well, yeah, we can make that product for you. There's a little bit of a lead time because we don't make that many of them, but if you don't have an inventory on the shelf in case something goes wrong when you need it, then you get yourself in a pinch.
Right. And that's an awesome point. I think if you have a relationship with your, and you guys are great at Eaton, I'm not going to make up something here. I mean, you guys do a great job, I know, working with distributors, and you're right. If you ask the right questions, I think you're in the right game and get the information that you need or get the products that you need. Marilee, Tom mentioned information and education, which I think is important. And I know Eaton is, again, working really hard to make sure that people know about these code changes. But what can they do? What is Eaton doing to help out our distributors and our listeners to get the information that they need about these latest code changes? Because if they don't know about them, then they don't know about them. So what are you guys doing to help folks kind of understand what's coming?
Well, we've got a great sales force, first of all. Our distributors can rely on our sales force, and specifically our distributor sales representatives who can answer questions that distributors have around product, things coming out like the NEC 2020, because they can get to the right resources like Tom or myself or the product line to be able to get their questions answered. There are certainly lots of, information on the web too, and on our website. I know for the power of authenticity for molded case, we have www.eaton.com/replacement circuit breakers. And that's where you can find education and tools around why it's important to know you have authentic product, who those non-authorized resellers are, so that hey, I can check and see whether or not the supplier that I have is authorized. You can also find an authorized distributor. If you don't know who one is, you can find one there as well. And Tom, I'll leave it to you. I know you've got blogs, lots of information out on the web. How can they find you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have our For Safety's Sake blog, and I keep posting as much as I can in that area. And also, I mean, I do a lot of education through International Association of Electrical Inspectors. I do education through IEEE, Institute of Electrical Electronics Engineers. And I work with customers directly. So I've always, I'm never shy about giving out my email or my cell phone. And that's how you build relationships in the industry, and that's how we solve problems together. So I can always provide. I don't know if you'll have it a part of the blog of this discussion. If my contact information is there, and the For Safety's Sake blog, Eaton.com/For Safety's Sake is the URL for that. But I'm always willing to share information anytime I can get a chance. Yeah.
Great. So where does this go? When do you expect these new regulations for either one of you? When do you expect these new regulations to actually come into effect? When do you think they'll be enforced? And maybe more importantly than that is, does this even get stronger? Does it need to be stronger? I mean, are there more things you're going to be working on to say, hey, you know what, this is great so far and it's a great step, but more needs to be done? When is this going to all come into play, and where does it go from here?
So let's talk about the adoption of the National Electrical Code. So the National Electrical Code is out right now. It's published. It's online. You can buy the books. You can start looking at the document. January 1st, 2020, there are some states, Massachusetts adopts January 1st, 2020, for example. So if you live in the state of Massachusetts, as of January 1st, 2020, you're enforcing the 2020 NEC. Other states and jurisdictions will adopt in a in a manner that will suit their probably history or the influencers within each of those jurisdictions. Because there are, believe it or not, there are some people, some organizations that don't want to see the latest version of the NEC adopted, or if it is adopted, they like to carve out the things that they don't like and amend the. It's like, but I'm not going to mention any organization names, but I could just tell you, and most people in our industry understand that code adoption will occur across the country, and we all try to work together to get a timely adoption and an unamended adoption, because no matter what jurisdiction you're working in, I may be doing a job in Atlanta, Georgia one day based on my organization, and I might be doing a job in Nashville, Tennessee the next. So the more consistent that we have code adoption and any amendments that are out there, local amendments, if we keep those at a minimum, is really important, because that increases the safety. But a lot of what we're talking about right now, with regard to reconditioning and refurbishing, the code doesn't have to go into effect for us to understand the safety implications of the requirements, and that we can really, a lot of this is just common sense. Knowing where you get the products, making and understanding the importance to safety that those solutions that bring to the table for a lot of people, not only just safety of the structure, but the individuals who are working on equipment. We can be mindful of where we're buying our products from. We can be looking for, if it is reconditioned, if I have to go that route from my facility because I've got a big power breaker that I take mine out, I put my spare in, I'm going to get the one that I've taken out, I'm going to get that reconditioned, refurbished. Making sure you're getting that done by a qualified organization, that's not afraid to put their name on that a piece of equipment. And it's not afraid to get some third-party review of the product after they get it reconditioned and refurbished, right? So we can start policing these today. But the code adoption process. For example, I think Pennsylvania is on the 14 code or something like that. There are different parts of Alabama. Some parts of Alabama are on the 2017 code. Other parts might not be enforcing any code. Okay.
Right.
So, there's a level with this type of a change. It's more like, do you want used product? Do you want reconditioned product on your brand new installation? And then does your customer know, right? That hey, I'm not going to go buy the new stuff. I'm going to go buy the reconditioned stuff. And would they be good with that, knowing that these products are not new products that are going into these new installations? So we can start doing this today just because it's the right thing to do. Just follow the transparency angle from these changes.
Right. And I think it's a great point. So to get to a bottom line on this, to make sure we're kind of all on the same page, what we're talking about is, one, buy from a reputable distributor, somebody who has an agreement with Eaton that says, hey, you know what? Yeah, we sell your products. Two, and check me if I'm wrong on this one, but you got to look for the logo, because now this new NEC regulation says if it's refurbished, the logos are, whether it's the UL logo or whatever reputable company is testing it. If the logo's gone, it's not good. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so that's another good point. So once I remove that UL label, there are still some code requirements that say the product has to be listed before you put it in, install it.
Right.
And if it has to be listed, it doesn't necessarily, I may still be permitted to recondition it, but I may require a reconditioned third-party, nationally recognized testing laboratories label on there that has reviewed that product before I install it, because an inspector will say, hey, that product can't be installed in this piece of equipment because the original listing mark is removed. It's reconditioned. That needs to be a listed product. So there are some locations. Not everything has to be listed that's installed, but there are some locations that require that listing mark, and that would be problematic if I remove it.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the deal. I'm thrilled that I got a chance to listen to what you guys had to say, and I want to continue to work with you guys on this. So, one, I appreciate the fact that you came on the podcast, to talk about this. And two, when stuff is happening, you need to get in touch with your guys to say, hey, call that crazy guy over at TED Magazine. And there might be some editorial here that we probably got to put together. So I hope you guys are going to continue to work with me on this as we continue to educate, our distributors on what reconditioned really means and what Eaton is doing, obviously, to continue to keep people safe, because it's only, life and death. It's only a fire hazard. So, I hope that you guys will continue to work with me on this, because it's important, and I don't want to, nobody wants to see anybody get hurt. For clarity's sake, I want to go through this one more time. 2 places that you can go if you're listening to get the information that you need. www.eaton.com/replacement circuit breakers is one place you can go. And then let's not forget about Tom's blog, which is www.eaton.com/for safety's sake, to stay on top of what's happening in the regulations. Both will certainly work for you, and certainly keep you ahead of the curve when it comes to the new regulations, and when it comes to obviously being safe and smart when it comes to selling these things. Tom Dimitrovich, I want to thank you for joining us. Marilee Williams, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I really appreciate the fact that you guys took time out of your day to talk about what is obviously a really important subject. So thanks to both of you for joining me and answering all of my questions, and spending the 40 or so minutes talking to me. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes.
And again, if anybody listening has any questions about this, and they want to talk to me about it, if they have other comments, anything they want to do, you can always track me down. Like Tom, I answer my own phone. You can call me directly, 314-812-5311. You can send me an email, scosta, COSTA, at naed.org. I hope that you guys have some more comments on this, and people are going to keep this conversation going, because it is important. And again, I thank all of you for listening to Distributed with TED Magazine. I hope that you'll continue listening. Until we talk again, this is Distributed with TED Magazine.